Welcome to episode 137 of the Scottish Liberty Podcast with me, Antony Sammeroff, and my illustrious guest, Marc Clair. You probably know him from the Lions of Liberty podcast. How are you, Marc?
I'm ready to roar, Anthony. Oh wait, this is not my show. I'm sorry. I'm so used to asking that question. I just felt like I had.
I was just about to say, more importantly, are you ready to roar?
I beat you to it. Well, I'm always ready, of course. When I get out of bed, when I go to bed, when I get out of bed, and everything in between, even when I dream, I am constantly roaring for the ideas of liberty. It's just kind of what I do.
You have subjected me to the humiliation of having to roar live on a podcast twice, and now
it's a fun little icebreaker, you know.
And now it's your turn.
You're the conversation guy. You know all about fun icebreakers to open up a conversation.
Come on, let's hear it. Let's hear your roar.
Hear my roar. Wow, no one ever asked for my roar. All right, roar!
My God.
That was honestly a pretty tepid one. I mean, I can.
That was a high quality roar. I was not expecting it to be that good.
Yeah, well, I'm doing a lot of interviews this week, so I don't want to blow out my entire voice just trying to roar for you. But that's about as good as I can do without killing myself.
There's a reason why you're doing a lot of interviews this week, and it's not because Lions of Liberty podcast has two names in common with Scottish Liberty Podcast.
2 out of 3 words. I mean, that's pretty close.
That's pretty close. That's pretty close. It's almost like
if we merge them, it would be the Scottish Lions of Liberty. What would a Scottish Lion?
Well, that's funny because on the British flag, one of the British flags, there's a lion and a unicorn, but the unicorn's Scotland and the lion is England. So it would be like we were subsumed. The unicorn got eaten. Unicorns are way more badass than lions. Unicorns of Liberty podcast. You never freaking thought of that. You missed the trick.
I think we just did. You better go trademark that right now, except that would be a little anti-libertarian.
The female libertarian. That would attract the female audience because we don't have enough female libertarians.
I mean, single female libertarians are basically the unicorns of liberty. So maybe a few of them out there should start the Unicorns of Liberty podcast.
That was genius.
Just an idea.
That was genius. They are.
You just have to pay Anthony and I a small fee as your producers. And then
That's it. So yes, it's almost as though someone stole the second 2 words of their podcast from someone else.
It's almost like that.
I know, it's almost like that. So you've been
or the other way around. Who knows?
How long's Lions of Liberty been going?
Well, funny you ask, because on Friday, September 13th, 2019, that will be the 6th year anniversary of the very first podcast that I ever released. It was originally just me that did this podcast. I had other
of Liberty.
What's that? We already had a website. So basically Lions of Liberty started, I can get more into the story in a bit, but we started as a website pretty much around the time of Ron Paul's second run for president. So around 2011 or so, that was started with a few friends of mine. But at that time, we basically just did articles and blog posts, and we were essentially a Ron Paul propaganda site at first. But then we started to do some more sort of original articles, kind of analyzing different current events in the news, really anything we could do to try to gain some traction. And we did that for a few years, just kind of plugging away. We built a little bit of a readership, I guess, and then podcasts were just something I listened to so much. I mean, no matter what I was doing, I have a couple huskies that I would take for really long runs and walks. And whenever I'm out doing chores or even when I work, I just found myself listening to podcasts constantly because I could just absorb information. And there wasn't that many, if you can believe this, at that time. There really weren't libertarian podcasts that I could find. I mean, I think maybe like Cato had some kind of podcast, and I think Lou Rockwell released some once in a while, but there really wasn't a regular libertarian podcast that you could tune into, every single week at the same exact time and get a new discussion on the ideas, really. So I just basically decided to start the podcast that I wanted to hear. And I'm not sure if you even asked me that question, but I just went into it.
It's all good, man. In honor of your 6 years as a podcaster, let the people...
I can't help but giggle because with your... which incredibly soothing, by the way, Scottish accent. Every time you say the word 6, I hear the word sex. But so it's our sex anniversary.
I completely forgot about that. The anniversary that we're facing a lot of adversity with our vocalization today. Yeah,
The adversity anniversary.
the anniversary of you losing your virginity, your podcasting virginity.
Podcast version, need to be clear.
When I
The
was,
other one we don't discuss, you know,
when I
and
was still waiting.
still working on that. Yeah, one of these days, I'm hoping podcasting will lead me to get rid of the other one too.
Get a female unicorn libertarian.
That's why we need these unicorns. Come on, ladies.
Right. So it's funny because when I was about 20, I went to Pennsylvania to.
I didn't ask for your virgin story, by the way, but go on.
To volunteer as a summer camp counselor, and the kids rattled me every time I said the word sex. But see, we say sex. I don't. It sounds different to me, but yeah, I don't know.
It sounds pretty much the same. Pretty much the same to me.
So am I meant to go sick? Anyway, in honor of this illustrious occasion of your 6 years as a podcaster, what are the Lions of Liberty doing?
Yes. The whole point of me doing this podcast circuit.
Not
correct.
the only point. Not the only
Not
point.
the only point. There are many points. I'm willing to talk about the ideas of liberty for any reason with just about anybody. So, but this gives me a compelling reason because we have produced, we funded, I guess I would say, a documentary basically telling the story of how we came together. And there are now 3 of us that are hosts on Lions of Liberty. We each have our own show every single week. We also do a bunch of shows together, both public shows and a bunch of shows we do for our Patreon, our Lions of Liberty Pride, as we call them. But it's myself. I host the Monday show, doing interviews with people like you. I host debates also with people like you. You've been in a couple of debates that I've hosted, which I've really, really enjoyed doing. And then on Wednesdays, we have Brian McWilliams, who does a show called Electric Liberty Land, where he breaks down current events and really takes a lot more of a comedic and cultural approach to the ideas of liberty, as opposed to like the philosophical approach. Or, I mean, he's got a little philosophy in there too. You know, he likes to interweave. And then on Friday, we have Felony Friday, which is our, in many ways, our most important show, because it really is, in some ways, a little bit less political. It's really John Odermatt hosts it, and he highlights different stories of injustice in the criminal justice system, whether it's through looking at news stories. But by and large, it's been interviews with people that have actually been through the criminal justice system and have overcome obstacles and that sort of thing. So to me, it's a very inspiring program. So those 3 shows make up the Lions of Liberty podcast in its entirety. You can get them all over at that feed. But yeah, this documentary, we've told our story in so many ways, but we really wanted to create a cool piece of media to sort of spread around and to sort of tell our story, kind of give ourselves a little more pub, so to speak. And we funded this documentary thanks to the money from our Patreon supporters. And we hired a good friend of ours. His name's Dan Smots. He is his company is called Goulash Films. He also hosts a show called The System Is Down. So I want to give him a big plug because he basically produced and directed and edited this entire thing basically on his own. He recorded myself and John throughout the PorcFest event. We were actually both in the car when we were telling the story, separately telling the story of how we all came together for this podcast. And then Brian, well, I want to keep it a surprise. Brian is actually telling the story in a very interesting and funny environment. So, and then that sort of interweaves those 3 stories into sort of one cohesive tale of how we came together, and interspersed with a bunch of footage that was shot at PorcFest in New Hampshire this past year, which is just an amazing time. I highly recommend checking that out if anybody can get over there. And so he really did an amazing job, Dan did, of putting this thing together and making us look our best, as good as we can look. But what we really wanted to convey was basically what we are, why we do this podcast. I mean, I wouldn't say we're not intellectuals. We all got to where we are in an intellectual way, but we're not academics. We're not people that spent all their years, stuffed into books. We're basically just regular people that have come to understand and become extremely enthusiastic about the ideas of liberty over the years. And we want to find unique and interesting and sometimes comedic ways to share those ideas and get more and more people talking about them. And, that's something we want to try to continue to do as these years go forward. So hopefully this is a little piece of something, a little good piece of media. It's only about 15 minutes long. I guess you'd call it a mini documentary. No one needs to see a 2-hour tale of how we came together. That would just get boring and repetitive. So this is really a tightly put together piece that hopefully will be very shareable and hopefully something that can really interest people, not just in what we're doing at Lions of Liberty, but again, just the ideas of liberty overall. The fact that there's some cool people out there having fun doing this stuff. We're not just all a bunch of stuffy nerds with our face stuffed into Mises and Rothbard books, although of course do that on our free time as well.
Yeah, like I totally don't do that. I didn't have a shelf full of books by Mises. Honest, but
Right.
yeah,
I mean, you got there through the comment sections, if I recall your story correctly.
it's quite partly, yeah. So let me ask you a question. Well, actually, first I want to say I am extremely looking forward to checking out this clip, this mini documentary. I'm not really good at fusing
Yeah,
words
mini
together.
doc works. Mini doc works.
Yeah, this mini doc. I'm really looking forward to it. I want to see what it's all about. But what I really want is to get for now to whet people's appetite for this. I want to get behind the main.
Ooh, behind the main.
Marc Clair
I
behind.
like it. You're not going to try to get me to shave my head like you did, are you?
I had no choice. I was balding. Well,
I
actually,
mean, you pull off the bald head well, but I have had my shaved head before, my head shaved before. Not since high school. Actually, no, I did it in my late 20s for one time too, and I don't have the right head
all
for
right.
no hair. Some people do.
You have to. Some of us just have to shave our head and go. Well, I already had a goatee, but having a shaved head necessitates a goatee. But to say that I was balding is probably to really understate the matter. I was pretty freaking bald for a long time. But yeah, I guess you being the leader of the pack. What do you call it? A pride, the leader of the pride.
Yeah, the Pride is what we have dubbed our Patreon group, the Lions Pride, which often gets confused with the other kind of pride, but we're okay with that because we're very accepting of everybody. We're libertarian, so that's fine. If people get confused and don't understand us and think that that's just a word we're cool with using because we don't care, then that's great. Come on in.
You are proud of your supporters, though.
Absolutely.
Very loyal they are. And but you being the main man, so to speak, to continue with the lion.
The puns are all over the place.
I know. Once I get my claw in, I really just cannot withdraw. I'm losing listeners by the pun. The rating is dropping.
Well, Brian is a pun master, and he uses them every week. So maybe we'll get some crossover. And as you lose your listeners, maybe you'll gain some of ours who appreciate the puns a little more.
Right. Okay. I've already lost enough listeners to you meddling kids. So yeah, I guess I want to get because we spoke. This must be fourth time that we've had a recorded conversation, but we've spoken
something like that. Sounds about right
over the years. But I don't know a whole ton about you, so this seems like an awesome opportunity to. I'm trying to think of some pun relating to lions with
behind the main worked pretty well.
Yeah,
I was a fan of that one.
We're going to get Marc Clair behind the main to catch two gazelles with one stroke, so to speak, which means I get to know my buddy Marc Clair and the listeners to the Scottish Liberty podcast do as well, all in one fell swoop.
Boom.
So tell us a little bit about Marc Clair. Where'd you live? Where'd you grow up? What do you do for a living? What is the meaning of life? Does God exist? Are there aliens?
Oh, wow. Do I have to answer all of those in one fell swoop?
You don't have to answer.
That sounds like a lot more than two gazelles, by the way. It sounds like I got to take down a whole, I don't know if they're called packs or what gazelles are called. But
well, answers on a postcard or a YouTube comment. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you live now? What do you do for a living? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
What gets me out of bed in the morning? Well, I got to go make money. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. But no, but I grew up on the East Coast of the United States. I grew up in the Buffalo, New York when I was younger, and then I moved to Connecticut. All cold places. So when it came time for me to become an adult and bloom out, I'd kind of gotten into TV production in college. I actually originally went into journalism was my idea, but I just found the way I was taught about journalism didn't make sense. So now I'm sort of doing my own sort of kind of journalism. I wouldn't call myself a journalist in what I do, but I'm applying some of the motivations behind that even today with doing interviews and that sort of thing. But I ended up really enjoying, I took like a video editing class where I edited a music video. I really enjoyed doing that. And so that kind of got me interested in doing TV production. So I sort of focused on that end of things towards the end of my time in college. And then when it came time to get a job, my choices basically were, if I really wanted to dive into the industry, to either go to New York City, which was very close. It's a place I was familiar with. I lived not too far from outside of there. I had a lot of family there, or to go to Los Angeles. So one time I visited a college buddy who had graduated before me. I spent about a week with him in LA, and my decision was made very easily. I got off the plane. It was sunny. There's palm trees. It was October, so it was like freezing back at home, and it was pretty cold in Connecticut. At least, what I would call freezing now is not what I would call freezing back then. My skin has, or I guess my blood has gotten thinner, you might say. Over the years, but I couldn't really argue with 70 degrees and sunny year round, although I know you don't use our degree system. So whenever I talk to my metric friends, things always get a little hazy there. But let's just say the weather's very nice here all year round for all our international listeners. And I was hooked. So I basically saved a little money, packed up, moved out to Los Angeles, and then I've been here ever since. How am I going to age myself or not? I've been here for a long time. Let's put it that way. And I skipped over a time there in college. I went to Pennsylvania State University. I was in a fraternity there, believe it or not, and I became friends with a lot of the people that have now become Lions of Liberty in later years. But one of those friends, he's not one of the regular hosts, but he does contribute to the podcast. His name's Howie Snowden, and he would always tell me, we would do a bunch of late night drinking and such, as you're wont to do in college, and we would always talk about crazy stuff, wild ideas, and he at one point started talking about this libertarian stuff, and he was already really into this, and he actually had when he was in high school, he was a page for a congressman. It's basically just like an intern for members of Congress. When he was a page, not for Ron Paul, but he met Ron Paul, and he actually had several conversations with him. He would watch his speeches in the House, and he got really just upset. He really loved this guy, and it really got him onto the path of libertarian ideas. So he told me about Ron Paul. This is way before Ron Paul ran for president. I mean, no one had really heard of this guy except maybe his constituents or, anybody who really follows politics. So I started subscribing to this guy's column called Texas Straight Talk. And I used to read it every week. And what really struck me, and this got me thinking about politics in a little bit of a different way, because I was raised, my dad was a Republican, and I listened to talk radio with him. So I didn't feel passionately about everything, but I guess I sort of identified as a Republican because that's just what was in my house. I didn't really know all that much about what that even meant.
Great in LA.
Well, yeah, we'll get there, because things have shifted over time. But because I definitely didn't refer to myself as a Republican by the time I got here, because I would say at first what Ron Paul just did for me was more than even think about the philosophy deeply. I noticed that he would criticize Republicans, and he was a Republican. And that just stood out to me. Like half his columns, more than half, they weren't just criticizing the other side like every other Democrat always did. He was criticizing the war on drugs and the overseas conflicts and all these things that usually you only criticize if the other side was doing them. He was criticizing his own team. That just stood out to me, and it made me kind of realize that politics in many ways is a bit of it's more than a bit. It's a total mirage. What we see on TV is completely different. I was also a big fan of this guy, Governor Jesse Ventura, who I've had the pleasure to interview both these people eventually, thanks to podcasting, both Ron Paul and Governor Jesse Ventura. But even not knowing much about his politics, I just remember liking the idea that he was this independent guy who became the governor without being part of one of these parties. So I really just liked him for that reason and no other. So, not really because of anything about his politics, because I just didn't know that much about it. It was very surface level understanding, but, I was attracted to the independent streak, I guess, in both of these people. And even growing up and hearing these Republican ideas, I just kind of remember questioning things a lot. I would hear, some conversation about some law, and I would always think to myself, and sometimes ask my dad, why should there be a law about this? Why should the government have any say in this? That was just sort of, I guess, maybe an instinctual thought that I always had. But anyway, once Howie told me about Ron Paul and I started going down that rabbit hole, I really started to think about the philosophy eventually, even more deeply. And he got me into Harry Brown. I read one of his books, How to Live Free in an Unfree World. That really got me thinking about so many possibilities in life, so differently. And I really just went down the whole rabbit hole, the Rothbard, Mises, all that fun stuff. And I really just, everything I read really entrenched me more and more that I was on the right path with the ideas. Because even when I would read things that I didn't agree with, I wouldn't just say I disagree with this, I'm out of here, and throw the thing away. I would really try to break down, why does this not make sense to me? And sometimes I would end up still disagreeing. I mean, there's aspects of libertarianism that libertarians disagree on all the time, little things here and there. But for the most part, I found myself just really challenging my views and then allowing myself to see a different way. And if that way made more sense, I would allow myself to go further down that path. So I do credit Howie, I think, largely for directing kind of an inner spirit that was probably already in me. So that kind of just led me to get excited about the ideas, but it was always kind of my own thing. It was just like a hobby. I don't know if it was this way for you, but it wasn't something I talked about with friends, with family, really with anybody for years and years. It was just ideas I thought to myself. I'd read books, read articles, and just think, oh yeah, things should be this other way. But that was as far as I went with it. It was really only when Ron Paul ran for president and started saying a lot of the same stuff on TV and showing such bravery to keep doing so, despite the fact that he was being mocked and laughed at. And I mean, literally laughed at by the hosts of debates and the fellow, all the candidates around him, who just didn't take him seriously at all. But he was saying completely compelling, completely world-shattering things that I completely agreed with. And, that seeing him really just able to face the challenge of continuing to be mocked at while continuing to just further double down on his views, never backing down. That was really what stood out to me. I started to say to myself, well, I can at least start talking to people I know. I can at least do something. So that really gave me the courage and the inspiration to make this, basically part of my life, like an important part of my life is talking about these ideas.
Fantastic. So what is your one deviation? Rothbard says that everyone is allowed one deviation. What is the area, or are there any areas that you fear would not be, what you suspect or you're worried would not be adequately? What are the weakest elements of libertarianism, or what do you fear might not work in an ANCAP society?
Now, I don't know if I'm the perfect libertarian. I don't know if you know that. So I think I have no flaws at all. I think I deviate from certain takes here and there that I think in Ethics of Liberty, Rothbard, for example, basically, and I know this isn't giving his full breakdown, full credence, but he does essentially argue that a parent could decide not to feed a child, because that's not technically, to force them to do so would be a kind of aggression. You might get listeners that send you rebuttal arguments and that sort of thing, and I'd be happy to read them, because I have read the actual work, though, just to be clear. I'm not just taking a paraphrase. It's pretty much does make an argument for that, and I don't really. I think the most difficult area, no matter what we're talking about, is actually dealing with children, and that as more of a broad issue, because there's clearly a point on day one when that child is born. You can't just say this child has the same exact rights to non-aggression as a full human, because you could technically say that feeding a child at sometimes might even be aggression. I mean, sometimes a child as a baby might just be like, not want to eat, and they have to eat because they're going to die. So is it aggression if you force a child to eat a little bit of food by putting the spoon a little farther into his mouth? I don't know. I've never raised a child, by the way, so maybe this isn't the best area for me to do deep dives on. Point being, I think we all agree that a one-day-old baby just can't make all the decisions in life for itself that it just is not physically capable of. And I think most people agree that a 35-year-old man or woman is, or as reasonably as anybody can, depending on who we're talking about. But there's as we get those numbers closer and closer together, as we get to 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. That just becomes a gray area. And I think that's the part where a lot of times I don't know. What should the age of consent to have sex be? I don't know. Is there an exact libertarian answer for that?
17.
I don't see it. I mean, it's really I think the fact that different countries and different states all over the world all have different rules about this, ranging from 12 to 18, basically. It kind of shows that humans don't agree on that. And I don't know the answer. I would be very uncomfortable with the idea of an adult sleeping with a 12-year-old. Personally, it just feels weird to me. In other cultures, it's not that weird. And am I really equipped to say that what's right and what's wrong there? I don't know. You could argue that once a human hits puberty and is physically able to procreate, I mean, you could argue that nature says that you must be allowed to make those decisions now because you're physically ready. And I don't really have a strong opinion on this on an exact age or at all. It's just something that that's what I struggle with the most, talking about any kind of age and consent type issues, because I think there's many areas where it's easy. If we're talking about a 2-year-old, it's kind of easy. If we're talking about a grown adult, it's kind of easy. But when those numbers get 9, 10, 11, 12, it becomes less easy to really determine exactly.
Because we love precise answers, but
right.
Some things really are on a sliding scale.
Right. And I'm not for aggression ever. So I'm not even trying to say that there's, I just think it's how do you argue? Like, can a 2-year-old own a gun? I mean, technically yes, but should they be holding a gun and waving it around and like playing with it alone? Probably not. So is it irresponsible of an adult to allow a 2-year-old to use a gun? Probably. But I actually want to go back to the Rothbard example because what I was trying to get to before I went on a tangent, as I want to do, basically, like, I think there is somewhat of, because libertarians always focus on negative rights, and I pretty much agree with that concept that your rights are just things that cannot be done to you. When it comes to parenting a child, I don't know. I think if you have a baby, I'm not saying the state should force you to feed it, but I don't think you should be able to just abandon it and let it die. Yeah. I don't think you should be allowed to put it in a corner and say, well, oh, well. I think you can abdicate the responsibility. I think you should just like find someone who will feed it. I just have that's just one area I think, and I think most regular people think that way too. But I don't know what age do you have to continue feeding it? People would probably say 5, 6, 7. Yeah. I don't know if he's 13 and can go get a job in some place that allow that. Can he feed himself now? I don't know. And almost everyone would agree that at 18, you should not be obligated to feed a child anymore. They're an adult. They should probably be able to, go figure that out on their own. So it's just all these issues with age become gray areas where if we apply the same concepts to adults, no one really has a question about it.
Yeah. And I guess, most libertarians would agree that you shouldn't be able to beat the crap out of your child. Some, myself included, don't think you should spank a child. Whether I think it should be against the law is a different issue. But at some point, you're going to come to a grey area. Well, if you can spank a child, can you put them on the naughty step? Can you send them to the room? Can you, right. And if they say no, are you allowed to pick them up and put them in the room and lock the door just because you think spanking's a breach of the non-aggression?
Can you send them to bed without dinner?
Right.
When it's really not healthy to not eat dinner or something.
It is a difficult issue, and it's it's a very difficult. There's a lot of things that parents can do that are psychologically damaging to their children that don't involve any physical aggression at all.
Sure.
So it's a really difficult area to...
What about a dad just pressuring his kid to play football, and he might really hate it, and he might not like getting hit on the football field, but his dad says, you got to play football.
Yeah.
You could say he never hits him and never. That's a psychological torture that might lead to him being physically hit and harmed in a way that he doesn't want to be. So where do we draw these lines? And again, I don't think there's a direct answer for all this stuff.
Yeah, So that is a gray area. So
that's why we need the National Liberty Court. That's every case is judged by Walter Block. That's the only solution to this.
Oh no. Okay, so I've got some more. So there's a question. That leads to an interesting question. Where do you come down on criminal justice? What kinds of consequences do you think there should be for committing crimes in a libertarian society? Are you? You answer the question first.
I think I used to very much fall on the side of, I don't want there to be any laws except, but then I used to say, well, except for those rapists and murderers, they should just be thrown in jail. But the more that I go along, I'm not just sure jail, just generically throwing someone behind a cage is either practically or morally the correct thing to do, even in cases of rape or murder necessarily. Obviously, if someone is an active threat to society should have a way to prevent that threat. That might even include throwing that person in a cage. I don't know. I'm not even saying it's not, because that might be justified at some point. If a person is just a danger, every time they're out, they're killing someone, and they won't go away. I mean, I don't know. At that point, maybe your choices are kill them or throw them in a cage. But I don't think that scenario I'm describing applies to the vast majority of crimes. For starters, we all agree in almost every country the vast majority of crimes are victimless, so we can just get rid of those in libertarian society right off the bat. And so many of those crimes, just for the war on drugs, for example, so many of the higher level crimes that people are in jail for are as a result of those first level victimless crimes. So the entire war on drugs perpetuates a ton of violence, and a lot of that would also be gone if the war on drugs were not there. So I think I think so much violence and a lot of objections by just describing how things wouldn't be that way in a more libertarian society. But I think it's just the truth. I think so much violence that we see in the world is because our systems are based around violence. So if you remove that initial violent act, I think as a consequence, you will also see far less violence in every other area of the world. I firmly believe that. But again, I think jail and that sort of thing is a conversation for the extremes. But the more and more I go down the rabbit hole and I read and learn from people like Robert Murphy, people that really think deeply, buying more and more the idea of sort of society and our institutions being able to shun people and sort of even have these like private jails where a jail is more a place you escape because you can't live anywhere else because you killed some people and you mess up real bad, and now the power company won't even give you power because no one wants to associate with you at all. So you can either go off in the woods and be away from society, or you can maybe go to one of these places where they let you live there and they let you somehow do some work, earn a living, pay compensation to victims, and hopefully build up your reputation again to the point that these institutions in society do allow you back in. And then at some point you've built up enough cred and money or what have you to leave that place. Those concepts used to sound more fanciful to me, but the more and more I think about them, I mean, what's fanciful is that the current system of criminal justice is remotely just or remotely fair or remotely effective. So that's the fanciful idea. So why not think even deeper about these things? And I think society at large might seem very far away from this stuff, but it is really one area where mindsets do seem to be changing, even on a global scale, even just with the war on drugs. And there's a lot of problems with legalizing drugs in the sense of the way governments do it, because a lot of them here in California, I mean, they still have drug raids for marijuana busts, even though it's been legal, here longer than any other place in the country, theoretically. But now it's so regulated that there's only certain companies that can grow, and individuals can't grow over certain amounts. So they're still busting people for this stuff. So the war on drugs continues despite legalization. I still think it's a net good because they're being largely decriminalized for personal use almost across the board. So that's a positive thing, regardless of all the regulatory mess that surrounds it. Boy, I got from starving children to the war on drugs in 2 minutes or less. Not bad.
Pretty good. So do you play a musical instrument?
Do the bongos count? I don't even really play those. No. Well, I was really into drums when I was younger, and I really loved doing the drums. I started to get okay at it until I got to the point where I wanted to buy a drum set. My parents completely nixed that idea. They just, we're not going to have that. So that's kind of where my drumming career ended. But musically speaking, I think my closest connection to music is that you may or may not know this, Antony, but I was the host of a karaoke night for about 8 years.
Amazing.
So that's my real musical, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, talent.
And what were the songs that you loved to sing when you were hosting the karaoke?
Oh, geez. Well, the first song I ever sang was Africa by Toto. So that's one of my favorites of all time.
I actually used to play Hold the Line by Toto on the piano.
Oh, nice. Oh, yeah, that's a great song. I think that's their most underrated song.
I used to rock that song out. I prefer it to Africa.
Yeah. And I'm a big Rolling Stones fan. I love it. Paint It Black is an old favorite of mine.
So what are your Desert Island discs? What are your favorite albums?
Oh, man, albums. I'd have to bring Pink Floyd Dark Side wherever I go. Am I allowed to take best ofs? Is that allowed?
Well, you should tell us a little bit about the music you like.
It's funny because I grew up in a household where my dad basically only listened to, essentially he just listened to 50s doo-wop and nothing else. Like even the Beatles were too new of a band for him to be into. So that's what I was exposed to. I never really got that into music until I started to learn about music from my friends, like in like middle school and high school. And I think my friends' parents mostly listened to like 70s and 80s rock, so they knew a lot about that stuff. So then I started to get into like Led Zeppelin and Rolling Stones, the Doors. I love the Doors.
Yeah, me too.
Like all those like 70s like hippie / stoner type bands. I really started to get into just thanks to my friends and I guess my friends' parents. So it actually trickled down more from my friends' parents. And then at the same time, I was part of that MTV generation. So I was really into all the 80s stuff. Michael Jackson. I was a huge Michael Jackson fan. Then into Guns N' Roses, Metallica. If it was on MTV's top 10 anywhere in the 90s or like late 80s, 90s, then I was pretty much into it. Love Nirvana, Pearl Jam, as all the grunge stuff started taking off. So I am kind of one of those people that hardly listens to any new music. So I did kind of like stop listening
They
to.
say that people tend to stop listening to new music after 30. Most people do.
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, I'll hear new songs here and there, and I'll say I like that, but I'm not cataloging it into my brain or anything like that.
Yeah, right. Okay. So, we're continuing Marc Clair behind the main. If you could have a dinner party with two famous guests, one living, one deceased, so it could be a historical figure, who would you invite to share dinner with you?
Oh wow, that's a good one. Well, I think deceased. Wow, see, but it's like, do I want to go way far back? I'm like, should I just invite Socrates?
You can invite two if you want. One way far. That'll make a nice round four of you.
Two dead guys.
Two dead guys.
Wow, that's gonna be a weird dinner.
History. One.
All right. Well, I will. Man, I'm just gonna make this a really fun dinner. So I'm gonna invite Hunter S. Thompson. He's my first more modern dead guy. Huge fan of his writing, and yeah, that's one person I always just wanted to like sit around and watch. Just have drinks and let him do his thing and see what happens. So I would invite him, and I think I would. Who would I want to invite? Oh man, why not bring my boy John McAfee in, just since we're gonna make this thing crazy anyway. John McAfee and Hunter S. Thompson hanging out. And then we'll just bring Socrates in there too. Why not? And he can do like some Socratic method questioning of all three of us, and hopefully we'll just discover the meaning of life by the end of the whole thing.
What would you guys talk about?
Man, I invited no women. We're definitely gonna need women with this crew here.
Sausage fest.
Yeah, it's a real sausage fest.
Right.
Well, McAfee's gonna provide the women. He's gonna take it.
Okay, that's a good shout. He's gonna bring the women.
Yeah, that's why he's invited.
Do a seance to recover our unicorns, Ayn Rand, Isabel Patterson, and Rose Wilder Lane.
Yeah, the whole crew. That's a great round table right there.
Yeah, the one that doesn't pull wins. So I'll tell you what. So okay, what movies have you seen in your life that made you go, wow, I learned something about life from that movie?
Wow. What movies? Well, I'm a huge fan just visually of the storytelling of Stanley Kubrick's movies. I don't know if I remember the first time I saw man, my brain is totally
2001.
2001 is incredibly visually stimulating. Why is my brain completely freezing on my God, I'm so embarrassed. Jack Nicholson, The Hotel.
Oh yeah.
Shining. My God, I had a blonde moment there. Yeah, the first time I saw The Shining, I was maybe like 12 or 13 years old, and I did one of those things where I didn't have a TV in my room, and I wasn't supposed to watch TV after whatever time. And my parents went to bed, and I snuck out, and I turned on the TV. And I found this movie like partway through it, and it was that scene just where the blood is like, this is on regular TV, but I guess it's 3 a.m., so it was fine. There's just blood pouring down the hallway. There's creepy little girls. There's this weird dude in the bunny mask, giving a dude head. I'm like, what is? And I don't even know what head is probably at this point. And I'm just like, my mind was blown, but I was sucked into it because I didn't really fully understand the story, but I was just like visually so taken in. And I ended up obviously like watching it for real and becoming a big fan of all his work. Just because it has a way of just creating a universe that just you feel surrounded by, like you feel like you become a part of it. So I really appreciate it. I think just in movies, just the ability to tell stories, whether it's through great writing or I think, and Stanley Kubrick's movies were well written as well, but really just he had a way of visually storytelling that I think is just really hard to replicate even today.
Great. 2 more questions, I think. Where did you hang out in the weekends when you were a teenager?
Where did I hang out on the weekends? Well, I was kind of a nerd, so I didn't. I didn't really like go to big parties or drink or anything in high school, but we did do the whole go to the mall, and I didn't smoke cigarettes because I was a good boy, but stand outside with my skater friends while they smoke cigarettes and that sort of thing, and then I also got like into do you remember the game Doom? So like it's a game that people would play like sort of network together. It's like a shooter game, but this is before we really even had internet. This is like the mid '90s. So they would have these like internet cafe type things where they were just set up just for games. So you would go there and like you could all be on different computers. You could all play these games together. So we would kind of go there and hang out. And I just did stuff like that. Hung out at friends' houses. I played some nerdy games. I got into Magic the Gathering. I was into all these like any kind of fantasy, because I was really into fantasy and sci-fi. So any games that combine that with like really having to think and strategize, I was a big fan of. So that's the kind of stuff. And then, the partying and fun came a little bit later in life.
Nice one. If you could wake up tomorrow in any country with any job you wanted, where would you be and what would you be doing?
Well, the only problem is choosing the country, because there's so many places I can envision myself living. Probably somewhere in the Caribbean. I've always been a fan of Nicaragua. I've been to that country many times. I also like Mexico. I like the Central America. I like cheap places that are really nice weather. And I'm just going to choose Nicaragua for now because it's my favorite. It's one of my favorite countries because every time I've been there, you go to Mexico. I don't know if you've ever been through that area. If you go to Mexico from the U.S., you're like, wow, this is really cheap. But then if you go even further south into Central America, you're like, wow, this is really cheap, and Mexico is expensive. So I'd say Guatemala and Nicaragua are both countries that I think are fantastic, that really apply. Like they're very, very, very cheap. It's a little bit harder to get around, but if you know a little bit of Spanish, you can figure things out pretty easily. And Nicaragua's got some amazing beaches. So I would definitely want to be near the beach in very nice weather in a very cheap location where I could, hopefully, whatever job, where I could just, I guess, post this podcast full time, record some podcasts in my little beach hut, come on out, kick my feet up, have some, beach drinks, go out in the water and just kind of relax. That's kind of my vision. That's something I'm actually actively thinking about and working towards in life. So I just need to make more money on the podcast.
Yeah, we just need to have 10 or 100 times as many libertarians.
100 would be great. I could probably manage it with 10 times, but 100 would seal the deal. So find 100 of your friends, people, and help us make this happen.
We need 100 times more libertarians in order to
I think that's the issue.
In order to be swimming in a big enough pool to... Or
we could sell out and we could just, toe more mainstream lines and entertaining fashion. It's an idea.
Great.
That sounds right now.
That's
I'm just saying we shouldn't take everything off the table because living on the beach sounds pretty nice.
It does sound pretty nice. What cocktail will you be drinking?
I'm a big fan. I'll probably default to like a rum and Coke, Cuba Libre, as I like to refer to them.
I don't know if you're drinking light rum, but I prefer dark rum.
I prefer dark rum as well, spiced rum.
Everyone drinks with Coke, but actually I prefer lemonade. It's more subtle, therefore it doesn't dominate.
Well, I was going to say that's the other thing. I can't drink a lot of Coke, so I eventually will have to switch the rum to something else or just switch off it altogether. So that's an idea. I haven't actually tried that particular combination. So
try the lemonade and give me the report.
All right.
This has been Marc Clair behind the main. Catch him at Lions of Liberty podcast. You must see the mini documentary called ...
and live free. The Lions of Liberty story. ...
and live free. The Lions
you can find that. Well, I don't know exactly when this is going to air, but you can see it before then if you support us on Patreon for as little as $5 a month. That's already available to our supporters, and then it will be released far and wide, probably on Facebook and YouTube. I don't know where else you release things. Maybe somewhere else if anyone has ideas. I want to get it as much out there as much as possible. So maybe I'll put it on Minds. I haven't started a Minds account. Everyone tells me that. Thing is, I don't like having a lot of accounts and posting a lot of places. So I kind of just post in the standard ones, and I'm not really much of a rebel when it comes to that, to be honest, because I'm kind of lazy. I don't like posting on 10 different sites. I leave that to everybody else.
I've got enough apps on my phone: Telegram, Signal, Facebook Messenger.
I don't need more.
Instagram, etc. So he is a quality guy. He is Marc Clair. He is the leader of the Pride. And please catch him on Lions of Liberty podcast. Until next time, please, Mark, since your first roar was so groundbreaking, roar us out.
All right, well, until next time, kids, live long and live free and roar!